Hello everyone. Today I'm going to read you a very special story called The Penguin and the Vacuum Cleaner. I've had this book ever since I was a little boy, so it's very precious to me, and I hope you enjoy this lovely little story. It was written by Carolyn Sloan with pictures by Jill McDonald. Josh the penguin lived very comfortably in a zoo until one day he caught mumps. His kindly keeper took him home for proper care and attention, and it was there that Josh met the strange animal called a vacuum cleaner, a meeting that was to result in confusion and chaos for Josh and his friend, the keeper. Jill McDonald has illustrated Josh's hilarious adventures with bright, amusing pictures that echo the originality and humour of Carolyn Sloan's story. Before I read you the story, here's the first 2 pages of the book, showing Josh the penguin, his friend the vacuum cleaner, and down the bottom here is a little mouse called Midas. Josh lives in the zoo. He has lots of penguin friends, and a keeper called Mr. Berg brings him fish and cleans his house. Mr. Berg looks after the penguins when they are ill. When Josh had mumps, he took him home and put him in a drawer in Mrs. Berg's kitchen. Josh had a hot water bottle and blankets right up to his beak. Mr. and Mrs. Berg took it in turns to sit with him. They gave him fish soup out of a bottle, and because they looked after him so well, he soon got better. One day, Mr. and Mrs. Berg went out to tea, and Josh was left alone for the first time in his life. He got out of bed and looked for Midas, a mouse who lived in the kitchen. But Midas wasn't there. Josh looked for someone else to talk to, and he found Mrs. Berg's vacuum cleaner crouching in a corner with its tail fixed to the wall. "Hello," said Josh, but it did not answer. "Poor thing," said Josh. "Perhaps you've got mumps too." And he patted it with his flipper. There was a loud roar and a blast of air that made Josh jump. "Don't growl at me," he said crossly, but the vacuum cleaner was humming busily and didn't hear. "Stop that thing!" Midas shouted from his hole. "I can't," said Josh. "Bang on it with your flipper." Josh did this and the cleaner stopped humming. It lay quietly, waiting. "What is it, Midas?" asked Josh. "Is it a hummingbird?" "I don't know," said Midas. "But I don't like it. It only talks when you bang that button, and it eats all sorts of things that I might like." "I wonder if it's hungry now," said Josh. He pushed the cleaner's talking button and it started to hum hungrily. It gobbled up all the crumbs and fluff from the floor, and then it swallowed a piece of string, a handkerchief, and some nuts. "Poor thing," said Josh kindly. "You are hungry. You'll eat anything." He climbed onto the table and tipped the sugar bowl on the floor, then a packet of tea and a jar of currants. The cleaner ate them all up. He gave it some rice, some cornflakes, and half a pound of toffees, and still the cleaner hummed hungrily. Josh was worried. "Mrs. Berg doesn't look after you properly," he said. "You're starving." And he flip-flapped round the kitchen, tossing everything he could find onto the floor. He gave the cleaner all the feathers out of his pillow, some flour, and a tin of sardines, but it didn't want the sardines. It moved on and found a roll of zoo tickets. "No, no!" shouted Josh, but he was too late. The ticket roll spun round and the long ribbon of tickets disappeared into the cleaner's mouth. "Oh!" said Josh in surprise. "Why didn't you tell me you liked paper?" He tore up some letters, bills, and a calendar. The vacuum cleaner was just starting to eat Mrs. Berg's cookery book when it gave a hiccup and blew out a green flash. With a sigh, it stopped eating. "Good," said Josh, flipping the switch. "You've had enough." Midas came out of his hole and looked at the cleaner. "It's very hot," he said. "What have you done to it?" I think it's got a fever," said Josh. "I think it's dead," said Midas, walking away. Serves it right for eating so much. Josh pushed the cleaner's talking button, but it didn't say a word. He tempted it with some of his fish soup, but it wouldn't eat. So Josh wrapped it up in his blankets and he sat beside it and stroked its head. When Mr. and Mrs. Berg came home, Josh was asleep on the floor. Mr. Berg put him to bed and Mrs. Berg put her vacuum cleaner away in the cupboard. "We must do something about those mice," she said. "Look at the mess they've made." "I'll block up that mouse hole now," said Mr. Berg, and he nailed a piece of wood across Midas's door. Josh slept so soundly that he did not hear Mrs. Berg trying to start her vacuum cleaner the next morning. He did not hear her ask Mr. Berg to take it to the mending shop. He just slept. When he woke up, Midas was banging on his blocked door. "Josh, let me out," he squeaked. "Josh, are you still there?" "Yes," said Josh, sitting up. "I'm here, but I can't let you out. Get out by your back door." "No," said Midas. "It's cold that way. How's the thing?" "I'll go and see." Josh went to the big cupboard. "Oh dear," he said sadly. "It's gone." "I expect they've buried it," said Midas. "Yes," Josh replied. "I expect they have." And he went back to bed. "I think I'll find somewhere else to live," said Midas in his complaining voice. "Are you sure you can't let me out?" "Quite sure," said Josh. Midas moved that night. Josh heard him packing, and then he heard him go. And then he knew what it was like to be lonely. Mrs. Berg gave Josh a bath in the morning, and she'd just put him back to bed when Mr. Berg came in with a big box. "Oh, good," said Mrs. Berg, opening it. "It's back. Is it all right?" "Yes," said Mr. Berg, "but it was choked with strange things, toffees and tickets, nuts and cornflakes." Josh sat up when he heard this. He jumped out of bed, and there was his friend, the vacuum cleaner. Mr. Berg plugged its tail into the wall, and it started to hum again, a happy, working sort of hum. Josh took the handle from Mr. Berg and guided the cleaner's long nose across the floor. Then he flipped its talking button and sat down beside it happily. "Funny penguin," said Mrs. Berg. "Josh is feeling better," said Mr. Berg firmly, and he took him back to the zoo that afternoon. But because Mr. Berg is such a kind keeper and understands penguin secrets, he takes Josh home with him on Fridays. And every Friday, Josh and the vacuum cleaner help Mrs. Berg with her housework. But Josh has never forgotten the terrible time when he overfed his friend, and he is very, very careful now. I hope you enjoyed the story of the penguin and the vacuum cleaner. I'm sure there are a lot of penguins out there that like vacuum cleaners just as much as Josh. But remember, don't overfeed your vacuum cleaner or it might blow up. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.